Claude Code is having a moment right now. But if you've been using tools like Cursor, you might be wondering, is Claude Code actually better? Well, I've been using Claude Code inside of Cursor for the last couple of weeks, and I've become kind of obsessed with these two questions. One is on the interface. Is a terminal-based interface with a coding agent like Claude Code actually better than the UI that I get with Cursor for chatting with an agent and reviewing and approving code changes? Or is that the wrong comparison to make? The second question is about performance. So if I already have access to Claude's most powerful models, Sonnet and Opus, inside of Cursor, then do these models perform better if I use them through the Claude Code interface? So in this video, I'll show you how I'm actually using Claude Code inside of Cursor and the specific situations where I actually reach for Claude Code versus the times when I would actually prefer to use the agent that's built into Cursor. I'm seeing a pretty strong case for both. But what's fascinating to me is the statement that Anthropic is making with their release of Claude Code. What are they telling us with this product? Where is this going? Well, what they're telling us is that the future of software engineering is not in engineering code. It's engineering agents who write the code. Now, a quick reality check. Have we arrived at this future where we as professional designers, developers, we're never going to get our hands dirty in the code base anymore? No. In fact, in this video, I'll show you what my real day-to-day looks like, where I'm shifting between these different modes, where sometimes I'm delegating entire tasks to an agent with Claude Code, and other times I'm collaborating directly with the agent and accepting code changes line by line with Cursor. But still, we can't deny where the momentum is shifting. Agentic coding seems to be the future, and with Claude Code, we are actually starting to step into that future right now. Stepping back, I mean, the pace at which things are changing right now for us as builders, it's like nothing I've ever seen before in this industry. So I'm sending out a weekly builder briefing. It's a free 5-minute read to help you and me keep up with today's tools and our craft in this new era of building with AI. You can get your briefing at buildermethods.com. So let's try to understand Claude Code by listening into this interview with its creator, Boris Cherny from Anthropic.
And so I see this as the evolution. So this is the languages have sort of, I think, leveled out. Kind of all the modern languages belong to kind of similar families. You know, there's like a few big families of languages, and they're pretty similar if you glance. But the experience is now really evolving, where now you don't have to deal with punch cards or assembly or even code. You deal with prompts, and the model figures out the coding part. And this is just hugely exciting to me as a programmer.
Now, if you're not using Claude day-to-day just yet, I want to show you just a few of the features that I think are unique and bring something new to the table. So starting off, of course, we're going to look at the orientation of Claude Code being a terminal-based interface. So here I am in Cursor. I've got my terminal down here. Now, of course, I already have Claude installed on my system. That's a simple one-line npm command. You can get the instructions through Claude's website. But once you have it installed, you can run it in any terminal. And that's one of the great things about Claude Code is that you can literally take it anywhere, take it into any other environment or IDE, code editor, whether you're using Cursor, VS Code, Windsurf, or even just any terminal client. You can run Claude Code anywhere. But what's really cool is that they also have these direct integrations with the popular IDEs, including Cursor and VS Code and Windsurf and all the others. So once you have Claude running in the terminal, you can run /IDE to manage your IDE connections. And as you can see, I already have the Cursor integration installed. And so what that means is if I'm in a file here, you can see here that it knows exactly which file that I'm in. Also, if I highlight some lines, it'll show that it has specifically 5 lines selected. So that goes right into the context window when I'm asking the agent something or instructing the agent on these specific lines of code or kind of zeroing in on this file in my code base. You know, just like I would if I were in the chat window in Cursor. Now, I don't have to actually use it in the actual terminal window. It also has this direct placement in Cursor up here. So if I click that icon, I can get rid of the terminal and then kind of use Claude Code in its own dedicated window. And I've been going back and forth with this. And, you know, I don't know how much I actually like it to have it in its own window like this. I think it could just be like the placement on the screen in the layout, because it really does sort of like cover up my actual code files. That's part of the philosophy behind Claude Code, is that you're interacting with agents in the terminal, and we're starting to sort of take us away from our actual on the ground code base, right? But the reality is I still jump back and forth quite often between the code and the cursor agent and my terminal. So I actually prefer to stay in here, because then I can use my command T to pop open and close the terminal. I can, fire up additional terminals, and then I can use my command L shortcut to open and close the cursor chat. That's sort of like the rhythm and the layout of using Claude Code inside of Cursor that I tend to like. Now, another really interesting feature, of course, is MCP integration. Anthropic are the creators of the MCP protocol, and just 2 days ago, from when I'm recording this video, they announced an official MCP support in Claude Code. What does that mean? Well, that means that you can integrate all sorts of other tools that you might be using in your development workflow and interact with them right from within Claude Code. So for me, I'm a fan of using Linear for, my ticket and issue management, writing up bugs, and planning out the roadmap for my products. And so we can use Linear's MCP server integrated with Claude Code, which really improves the workflow of taking the next Linear issue and having Claude Code work on it. Let's take a look at that right now. So I've already connected the Linear MCP to my Claude Code, and you can check Claude Code's official documentation on how to do that. They've got really great docs, by the way, which are really helpful. So having that installed allows me to literally just type in and say things like, what's the most recent Linear issue? All right, so it did find one, but that's actually not the one that I want to do. But an even faster approach is to literally just go into Linear and grab the latest issue. Okay, so it found it. It actually took a few moments to get there. And by the way, I must say, I have found Claude Code to be a bit slow for these smaller, trivial tasks. And that's why I think Claude Code is actually better at just acting as an agent and going off and doing larger tasks. We're going to get into that. But it did find it, and it found all the details that I had already written into this particular issue. So we're going to have Claude Code actually work on this. And let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. So I've been working on the new website for builder methods. And if I go down to the bottom, there's this contact form, which is just name, email, what's this regarding, and a message. And I want to actually add another field in between the email and the actual subject line, which is going to be a selection dropdown with a few options in terms of like, are they inquiring about AI coaching or sponsorship or, one of my upcoming courses on building with AI. I need to know like what the contact message is going to be about. So I'm asking it to add that selection dropdown, and these are going to be the options for what that selection will be. I also want the agent to update the mailer that I get sent when a contact message is sent, so that we get that piece of information included in the mailer. So, there's a couple different files involved. It's not a huge task here, but let's see it actually work on something. And by the way, while this is working, I want to show you something else. So in my Claude.md file, which is very similar to cursor rules, it's like the memories for Claude. So every time it's going to work on something, it can kind of refer to these notes. I added some instructions on how to handle linear MCP instructions, meaning when you start working on a task that comes from a linear issue, I wanted to do a few specific things, like changing the status on the issue to in progress. And when it's done, it's going to drop a comment on the issue. And then when it's done, it's going to change from in progress to in review. So just some like organizational stuff. But again, I don't need to repeat those instructions. They're just built into my Claude.md file. Now, this comes up from time to time. It asks permission to do something. And I want to do Shift Tab to put auto accept edits on. So that's actually going to give it permission for that specific request. So I might see that come up again. All of those permissions are in Claude settings local, and then it's going to sort of just like list out all these different permissions that you grant it as you go along. So this is one of those differences in the experience of working with the agent through Claude Code, where we can actually let it just go and make lots of changes across lots of files. I don't have to actually accept each individual file. Whereas with Cursor, when it does make edits to multiple files, I still need to review and approve, like literally click the button to approve every single file edit. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes I prefer something a little bit more hands-off like Claude Code. So this is all done. Now, by the way, I don't know if you actually heard that, But in my Claude.md file, I also added this line to play the glass sound when a task is done. It sort of gets my attention. So if I have the agent working on something and I'm working in a different app, it'll sort of alert me with that audio sound, just like, Cursor has that feature built in as well, which I really like. So I just added that to the Claude instructions or Claude memories, if you will, and that works. So this task apparently is finished. Let's take a look at Linear to see what it did there. It actually checked off the checklist items that I put into the description in Linear. I instructed it to do that. It also posted a comment. It looks like it's from me, but this is actually from Claude Code through the integration. And it lists out all the changes that it made here. And finally, it actually changed the status from in progress to in review, exactly what I asked it to do. So that looks really good in my project management setup in Linear. Let's actually take a look at the app and we'll take a look at the code and see how it did. So yeah, here is the select dropdown. I do need to fix some styling to make it look more like a selection, but looks like it has the options that I want there. So that's good. All right, let's test this out. I'm going to select that and make sure that this piece of information is going to be passed along in the mailer that I receive when a contact message is sent. Okay, so here is that mailer, and it actually did a good job of just adding it right into the content of the mailer that I received. I can review the individual code changes by looking back in the logs here in Claude Code. Now, I must say, like, this experience of looking at each individual code change is just not as good in the Claude Code terminal interface. This is the kind of thing where I really prefer interacting with the cursor interface if I want to have that granular control and reviewing and approving each individual line of code, or maybe, rejecting certain lines of code. That's a lot easier to do in the way that Cursor lays it out. But as we can see here, it basically did everything exactly as I wanted it to. So Claude clearly is a very capable agent. This, of course, was a pretty simple task, but I think it does just as well on much more complex tasks. So another feature in Claude Code that makes it really powerful are slash commands. I mean, custom slash commands, right? So it is a terminal interface, and it's all about, using the slash key to get to things. Now, this top one, git commit, I actually created that as a custom slash command. So your custom slash commands live inside your Claude folder inside commands. Now, in this project, I've only created one. That's for git commit. It's a markdown file. These are my instructions for how I want a git commit message to be created every time. It's a really deep description of exactly how I want commit messages written, examples of good commit messages, examples of bad commit messages, and everything. So obviously, every time I ask Claude Code to commit the changes, I'm not going to rewrite all of these instructions. So these custom commands are sort of like my collection of saved commands that I can reuse again and again. And of course, the more we use Claude Code, the larger we can grow our library of these custom commands. So when I use it, it's nice because all I really need to do is hit the slash key, and it puts your custom commands at the very top. So this first one is my command. If I had more, they would also be at the top. And then below that, we have the other slash commands that Claude Code gives us. Now, these custom commands are also scriptable. So you can even pass arguments into these commands and do more powerful things with them. Again, this is what's getting us into engineering the agents as a layer in between us and the actual code. So this shift is just really interesting. Another interesting feature, I'm actually not using this quite yet, but I probably will at some point, is the GitHub Actions integration with Claude Code. So you can actually set it up so that from within GitHub, you can just mention Claude and ask it to review a PR or give it a task, and it'll go off and do that via GitHub Actions. I always like to think about what is the meaning behind the tools that we're using to build with AI. And right now, it's pretty fascinating what's happening with Claude Code, right? So if working with Claude Code in the terminal takes us one step away from working with the code directly, interacting with Claude Code via GitHub Actions takes us like another step away from the terminal. We're now literally talking about like a remote agent that we are delegating tasks to. It's going off and doing them and completing them. It's not even happening in our local environment. Again, it's this theme of we are moving toward a world of agents doing the work for us, and our work as designers and developers and architects is to engineer the agents themselves. Now let's get back to my questions about the interface and the performance of Claude Code. I thought this part of the interview with Boris was interesting.
Like if you're used to handwriting code, I think now the industry is shifting to a place where you're orchestrating agents that write your code. And it's more about reviewing code than handwriting code. And yeah, I think people have to kind of deal with this transition. And I think as a programmer, it's incredibly exciting because you can do so much more, so much faster.
Right.
And there's still some stuff where I'll have to dip down and kind of handwrite code, but now I kind of dread it.
Now, obviously, I agree that directionally, this is where we're going, away from handwriting code and toward agentic coding. But there are still certain situations where I prefer to be more hands-on, even if I'm still working with AI. I would say that roughly 80% of the code in my projects is now written by AI and not me actually typing it. But the way that I interact with AI agents is different depending on the task. There are still lots of situations where I just prefer Cursor's interface for actively collaborating with the AI to design and craft and complete a feature. And for me, this is especially true for front-end design tasks where I'm writing Tailwind CSS, I'm checking the browser, I'm tweaking, I'm making things pixel perfect. I also like to think of Cursor's agent interface as like a pair programmer where we are zooming in on a particular area of logic, and I can accept or reject individual lines of code until we get the system just right. Claude Code doesn't really do a good job of having that level of granularity or direct collaboration on a feature. But there are other situations where Claude Code really shines, like when I have a large task, involves lots of different files in my code base, a lot of legwork. Claude Code is just really capable and really good at methodically executing tasks like that, as long as they are well planned and well scoped. And I'm going to get to planning mode in Claude Code in just a second. Now, in my last video on this channel, I showed you Cursor's new background agents feature, which has a very similar use case as Claude Code, because in both cases, we're essentially delegating a task for the agent to work on elsewhere while we do other things. That's how I think of these background agents in Cursor, or Claude Code in its ideal use case. It's an agent that can take on a big task while I do something else. And this is where I think that Claude Code really has an edge when it comes to performance, because when I think of Claude Code as an actual autonomous agent, it just seems to be more successful and confident with these larger tasks. Whereas the background features in Cursor is still useful, it seems to perform better in smaller bug fixes and tightly scoped background tasks, really good for knocking out your backlog, as I talked about in the other video. So I do think that Claude Code is highly capable, but it's only as capable as the plan that you're asking it to execute. So let's talk about plan mode in Claude Code. And to understand why plan mode is now a core part of the Claude Code product, let's hear what Boris had to say about that.
I'd say the biggest thing that I've seen power users start to do in and out of Anthropic is ask Claude to make a plan before it starts to code. And something people will do sometimes when they first start using Claude Code is they'll be like, hey, write this really big, complicated feature. And then they get frustrated when it doesn't do it the way that they imagined in their mind. And a really good way to kind of align what you want to do with what Claude wants to do is ask it to make a plan and run it by you first.
So just a few days ago now, the team at Anthropic announced plan mode as a core feature in Claude Code. So you can get to it with Shift Tab, and you sort of toggle between auto accept at its on. That's like when you're actually working on a task, or you get into plan mode here. So let's go ahead and actually plan out the next feature that I want to build. And I'll show you what we're working on here. So on builder methods, I'm planning to release some courses on building with AI. I call them just-in-time AI learning courses. Now, these 4 courses are in like pre-launch mode. So if you click on any one of them, we're going to get to this like waiting list form. And each one of them has a different waiting list that anyone can sign up for. So when someone fills out their email and they join the waiting list, currently they just get to this page, which just says you're in. But since these are upcoming courses, I want to actually collect some feedback and understand what the top questions are so that I can really make these courses as useful and helpful as possible, right? So I like to have these survey forms, but I want to make sure that I have a survey for all 4 of the courses and understanding which course each individual subscriber is interested in and having those questions be specific to the course. So, we're going to need a little bit of coordination between figuring out which course the person has raised their hand to say that they're interested in and then sending in the survey response for each of these 4 different courses, right? So I wrote up this feature in this linear issue. So this was just me writing this. I could have used AI to help me craft this. It's sort of just me getting like the raw like functionality out of my head. And this is sort of the description. I could just copy and paste this into Claude Code, but since I do have the linear MCP integration all hooked up, I'm going to go ahead and just do this. I'm going to grab that linear issue right there. Please plan this issue. Now, while it's working on that plan, I want to tell you about the think hard keyword, right? So what I could have done in that prompt was I could have asked it, please review this issue and plan it out and think hard. That's a keyword that's going to trigger Claude Code to spend a little bit extra time thinking and analyzing and coming up with a more reasoned response. You can even say think harder, or you can even say ultra think on this task, and each one of those sort of ratchets up the level of resources and time that it's going to spend on the planning. All that being said, I'm currently using the Claude Opus model, which is sort of like the best of the best. Of course, it's kind of expensive, but I am on the max plan, which is probably the best deal right now for working with Claude Code. So I'm sort of just waiting for it to, analyze and think through this plan. And here we go. So here is Claude's plan. Again, like the planning phase is a core part of the process. It's a best practice. And so the team at Anthropic designed it in as a first class feature. You could see with the borders, like they're really emphasizing like this is how you can be successful with Claude Code, is if you actually spend the time and sort of front load the effort in the planning phase. And Claude Code does a really good job of supporting that workflow. So here is the plan that they came up with. Now, I do want to sort of like clarify the plan here with Claude before we move forward, because it's sort of describing some things that are already in place. And I want to make sure that it's going to focus its effort on the back end, on implementing these forms. Okay, so I'm responding to Claude here. I'm saying, you've described the design and interface as we already have. Please propose your plan for implementing the survey form. A couple more details. I told it to reference the linear issue, and I'm asking it to think hard this time. Let's see what happens. Okay, so here is Claude's updated plan for implementation. It did a really good job of numbering this out with bullet points, and I reviewed everything here, and it all looks exactly how I would want it to be implemented. So let's go ahead and proceed. Okay, so Claude is working on the task that I gave it, and it's making lots of changes. I love how Claude makes its own to-do list, and it sort of crosses off the items as it goes. Now, while Claude is cooking, I think this is a good time to talk about something that I just find a little bit challenging right now when I'm working with Claude Code, and that's multitasking, right? So, Claude Code really works best as like an autonomous agent where it can go off and do these large tasks on its own. And I could open up a second and third and fourth instance of Claude Code in different terminal tabs, but they would all be on the same Git branch. And of course, that means that we would risk running into code conflicts unless I have the tasks really working on totally separate parts of the code base, which is kind of rare. It's also kind of frustrating that like while it's working, like I can't really go and work on other parts of the code base. Again, for that same reason, I might run into conflicts. Now, there is a workflow to do proper multitasking using Git work trees. It's a little bit more complicated. I'm still kind of working out the workflow for that myself. Once I do, I'll probably post another video here on the channel to really cover multitasking in Claude Code, because I think that that would be a really powerful use case, especially given the fact that it is so strong as an autonomous agent rather than like an active agent the way the cursor is. Okay, it looks like it's all done, and it gave me all the information about what has been implemented. And let's refresh the page and test it out. So I'm going to go down to courses, and let's go ahead and subscribe to a course. Okay, so here we are, and I can see the new survey form. It sort of added some extra styling around it that I didn't quite ask for. So I think I might start to update my Claude memory files to give it just more specific instructions to really dial in exactly what I want it to do and what I don't want it to do. And really that's the process of working with these agents, is like working with them and finding the areas where you just want to course correct it and build it into the systems, build it into the instructions, whether it's cursor rules or the Claude.md file. And that's what it means to engineer our agents, right? But overall, this is looking good. Let's actually go ahead and test it out. And it also did a good job of passing along the email address from the first step. That's something that I did not have in place before. It added in that logic. So let's go ahead and send. Okay, so we've got this thank you page. Again, it's the front end details that I'm going to need to sort of tweak, but it has all the content that I wanted it to have. So all of that is actually working really well. But, there's one thing that I just noticed about this implementation. I submitted the survey form, but where did that submission go? With my contact form, I actually get an email sent to me with that survey information. And so I see this. So Claude actually added this comment for the survey submit action in my controller. It says, like, here you would typically save survey data to your database. For now, we'll just redirect to the success page. So like, it didn't really complete the feature, but that's not a fault of Claude Code. That's my fault. I did not include that detail in my plan, and I sort of overlooked it when we were reviewing the plan. I just sort of thought that it would assume that we need to send the survey response the same way that we already do with our contact form, but we can't really assume those details. These models, whether it's Claude Code or any other agent that you're working with, they're extremely capable at carrying out the tasks that they're given, but you do need to be really explicit about exactly what you want it to do. So we just can't assume it's going to understand these details naturally. Thought that was a really interesting, teachable moment. So I hope you're starting to see a pattern here, right? The idea of hashing out a plan before we ask the AI to build a feature or execute a task or multiple tasks in a large project. That's quickly becoming the industry best practice, no matter which tool you're using, whether you're using Claude Code, which does an excellent job at that sort of workflow, or using Cursor or Windsurf or any of these other ones to build out the plan ahead of time and execute the plan step by step. So developing PRDs, or project requirements documents, is the way that professionals are building with AI today. And that's the topic of my other video on how vibe coding goes pro. So after you hit subscribe on this channel, go ahead and watch that one next. I'll see you there.